Opponents of Merry Christmas and other uses of the word Christmas know exactly what they're doing. They're disingenuous when they dismiss defenders of Merry Christmas as fabricating some, quote, war on Christmas. Of course it's a war on Christmas. Or more precisely, a war on the religious nature of America.
What role should religion play in a free society? More and more people today would answer, none. That would not have been the answer of the founders of the United States.
Adolf Hitler was no nationalist.
So, PragerU then. Thank you for everyone who participated in the poll. Also, thanks for everyone who subscribed to my channel. I never expected to reach such numbers so quickly. And let's get started. So, for the few who don't know, PragerU is a conservative university and a YouTube channel mainly funded by the Williams brothers, some ultra-conservative billionaires who run an oil business. So it's not something weird that when you search their videos, you find crap like climate change denial. I like how climate scientists are brainwashing people like sheep there, and generally anti-poor, pro-business videos. But if we get into refuting every single PragerU talking point, it will take us forever, honestly. So I will dedicate this one just to refuting a video titled Playing the Black Card by Candace Owens. Now, Candace Owens is a political commentator, mainly known for being a black conservative. She is friends with many other popular conservatives such as Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, and even Kanye West, though this one didn't last long. And she's also known for blaming the problems facing the black community on black culture and black victim mentality, rather than addressing the obvious factors like being born into poverty and facing education inequality. But I shouldn't speak about it myself. Let's see what she has to say.
You've heard about the black card, right? No, not the one from Visa or American Express. This one is much more valuable. There are entire organizations that have been built upon it, and individuals that have used it to acquire both wealth and influence. If this sounds like something you might wish to own, you should know that there is only one way you can get your hands on it. You have to be born with black skin. That's the only requirement. Really.
So I think I see where this is going. Candace claims that if you are born black, you have a black card that you can use, or black privilege, to reach success and acquire influence. But I really can't see the effects of this black card, since the black population is on average much poorer and more economically devastated than the rest of the population. And if you are born black, you have a 66% chance of being born into a poor family, which is 16 times more than whites, needless to say. And it is even more than that. If you are a black person using drugs like marijuana, you are 3 times more likely than a white person to be arrested for it, even though African Americans and whites are using drugs at incredibly similar rates. And above all of that, police are more likely to kill unarmed people with black skin rather than any other race. So I really don't see the special advantage or privilege of being born black above the rest of the population that Candace tries to convince me with. And if there's such a thing as a black card more valuable than Visa and American Express, as she says, then I really hope every black person uses it to recover themselves from the devastation caused by centuries and centuries of discrimination that still has its effects today, which I'll explain later in the video.
You can be poor, middle class, rich, it doesn't matter. The black card will still confer upon you an entire history of oppression, even if you've never been oppressed.
This has been a very common talking point of the right. Since blacks are not discriminated against anymore, they have no reason not to succeed, and their failure today is due to their laziness, or even in some cases, their low IQ, if you know what I mean. But the reality is, past discrimination still has a very visible effect on blacks even today. Remember, blacks weren't treated as equal citizens literally just around 50 years ago, which is less than a lifetime to say. And if we look at it from the beginning, even after slavery was officially outlawed after the Civil War, blacks were left with no money or no resources to improve themselves or work. So they moved into sharecropping, which is basically getting massive loans so they can have a land to farm on and farming equipment. But these loans were at outrageous interest rates. So blacks had to give up most of their profit to lenders, and they still lived in very visible poverty, massive debt, and economic slavery, even after slavery itself was outlawed. But of course, I'm not saying this is the same case after ending segregation in 1968, but we can notice a very similar pattern. Please give me your attention to what I'm going to say this moment, because it might seem a little bit complicated. So blacks were devastated by the segregation era that gave them a very poor quality education, if any at all, so they couldn't get well-paying jobs. And those people who lived under segregation were already poor and with no education after it ended. So they raised kids that were born into a poor family and lived without proper education too, because being born into a poor family makes you much less likely to get out of poverty and receive quality education. Those poor people raised poor kids, and so on and so on. It's almost like a cycle of poverty, so the effects of segregation still can be seen today. And I'm not saying discrimination has entirely ended either. There are, in fact, some visible and significant forms of unjust discrimination in businesses against blacks, which keeps them from improving themselves and succeeding in their careers. But I'll explain that later in the video when Candace brings it up.
Ironically, the people you might think have the most legitimate claim to the black card refuse to use it. Take my grandfather, for instance. He raised me from the time I was 9 years old. Born in 1941 in rural North Carolina, he started working at age 5, laying out tobacco to dry on a sharecropping farm. Jim Crow, separate drinking fountains, and the KKK were ever-present realities. He was 17 when he married my grandmother. He made a living cleaning homes and office buildings until he saved up enough money to open his own cleaning business. The thing is, he never played any card.
This pretty much becomes Candace's main talking point for the rest of the video. My grandfather did it, so you can too. Well, since she couldn't bring actual statistics or evidence supporting her position that blacks are privileged and that for a black person to become successful, despite all what we have mentioned, it's very easy with just effort, she descended into using anecdotal evidence, which is the use of personal experience or isolated examples instead of compelling evidence or actual data. And you can play this forward, you can play this game if you want to win any argument, because some exceptions exist for most rules. An example of that would be me saying, this man ran by a speed of 27 miles per hour, therefore other people can do it too. But that's obviously not the case. This is Usain Bolt, the fastest man alive, and the average human running speed is only 10 to 15 miles per hour. And I'm not saying here that the chance of a black person becoming rich or becoming successful is as rare as someone running 27 miles an hour, but it's still challenged and still pretty hard and much harder than other races when we look actually at the data and when we look at statistics. So I can bring isolated anecdotal examples for a group, but it is in no way reflective of the group as a whole or even most of it. The black population is over 40 million. So we can accept some exceptions like Candace's grandfather, but this is not the case for most blacks at all, as only 10% of them are relatively rich. And whatever she says doesn't change the reality that most blacks inherit poverty, which makes it harder for them to climb the ladder, and that they face challenges including education inequalities, neighborhood problems, workplace discrimination, parenting problems, limited access to credit, and higher rates of incarceration, and so on and so on.
Nor did my grandmother. If they had problems, they didn't blame anybody, they just fixed them. And they raised me to do the same. Chores were a requirement in their household. So was reading the Bible every morning before school. I didn't like the Bible readings, and I hated the chores. But I realize now that these small acts of discipline, although sometimes stifling, had a strong, positive impact on my character.
I don't have much to say there, but it just fascinates me how PragerU manages to address their Judeo-Christian values in nearly every video they make.
I could have played the black card and absolved myself of all responsibility for my own stupid decisions. Except I didn't. Because it would have destroyed my grandfather's legacy. If believing in myself, if accepting the responsibility for my failures somehow disqualifies me from owning an imaginary card, then let me be the first to declare that I don't want one. If there is one thing that my family history has taught me, it's that I do not need a black card or an imaginary anything to make something of myself.
I didn't want to descend into personal attacks at the beginning of the video. I always try to make sure that I address people's points and arguments rather than their person. But the hypocrisy is just so strong with this one. If there is a magic black card that gives black people privilege, Candace, then no one uses it more than you. You have built your entire career as a black conservative. This was the focus of nearly every public appearance you've made, which was why organizations like PragerU's and Turning Point USA are running after you. They know that they need a black conservative to convince blacks to become conservatives. And if you could substantiate your claims with something other than anecdotal evidence, loaded language, and appeals to emotion, then we may have been convinced. So yeah, this is pretty much what the video had to say. Some buzzwords about success and rhetoric about effort without actually addressing the actual problems that most blacks face. They are born into poverty, which limits their abilities and makes them bound to it for the rest of their lives. And even if you improve yourself as a black person, get university education, and have a good portfolio, actual discrimination against you will still exist in businesses no matter what you do about it. For example, whites receive 36% more callbacks from job interviews than equally qualified blacks. So yeah, that was pretty much all the video. Please consider subscribing to the channel since it wouldn't take you 3 seconds and it took me more than 8 hours to make this video and do the research about it. Also vote in the Twitter poll if you want to choose the target of my next video, and I'll see you later.